Hello, and welcome back yet again to a history of saps, blackjacks, and slungshots. So I'm very excited to show you this one. This is actually the item that got me interested in this entire subject. And it's hard to get in on the frame, as you can see. This is our biggest weapon by far. And it's okay that it's out of focus. We're going to examine each part in detail. But what you're looking at here is a Native American slungshot war club. And you can notice the damage right there in the foreground. You know, it's actually disconnected, unfortunately. I say that, but I should say fortunately, because that's probably the only reason I was able to afford it and that nobody else bid on it. So I'm really happy to have this. Is an authentic Native American war implement from the mid-19th century. And yes, Native Americans used saps of their own, basically, of their own devising, and it's impossible to tell what kind of cross-pollination or influence there was from the European American, versions to the Native American side, or vice versa. I have no idea. But these were being used at the exact same time and in the same place, meaning North America, as so many of the other weapons that we've covered. This one here is kind of an outlier in several ways as far as our, study goes, but it's obviously kind of an encased, flexible, weighted bludgeon. It really is a slungshot at the end of a club, so there you go. As far as the name, but it's an outlier even within Native American weaponry. They're much more famous for, tomahawks, of course, but fixed war clubs as well. They had a wide variety. Some really fascinating ones, especially from the Northeast, the ball clubs. But basically, you take a stone, lash it to a stick, and you're good to go. Something like this takes a lot more work, as you can tell. You're going to see how much work went into this thing in a minute. But all the work that goes into this is to gain you that flexibility, of course, and reach. So another way that this stands out from our subject is that this is a weapon of all-out war, right? This is not a personal self-defense item at all. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this so we can take a look. Now, you probably can't see in there too well, but at least because of the break, I got to see a little bit on the inside, and the wood that's in there, the shaft, is actually kind of like conical. So it comes to a point, and the rope, I presumably, was spliced kind of around that. And you can see where, over time, the motion, the swinging of the weapon would wear into the rope. If you think about it, then, this not only took longer to construct, but it didn't last as long. So it seems kind of high maintenance, but that gives you an indication of how useful it was seen as, right? The extra power generated, the extra reach, the fact that it can reach around a shield, and a lot of Native American warriors did have shields, although that's not kind of typically portrayed. And you can see the amount of detail that was put into this. See that colored band on the buckskin there? Well, first of all, the wooden shaft, that top of it, has buckskin stitched over it. Not entirely necessary, but you can see they did it. And those colored bands, there's a lot more of them, and I bet they were very vibrant back when this thing was first made. Now they're greatly faded. I'm glad we can still see them. You see those tassels there that I touched a second ago. And that brings us down to kind of the middle of the shaft portion. This is really interesting. I've actually never seen one quite like this, and I've been to plenty of shows where they highlight kind of antique Native American weapons. I found this part to be just really fascinating. It's a square shaft that's incredibly strange, the cross-section. And if that wasn't strange enough, it's beautiful too. I love look at the flat section. It's just the wood there and the way they catch the light. But then on top of that, it has these geometric notches in there. And I've never seen a weapon like that. And if you pay attention, you're going to notice that there's different colors. It's not ever the same color twice, although it gets close sometimes. But it has different colors throughout, and each one has a different symbolic meaning. And I think that's pretty fascinating. And it raises the point that Native American weapons often had kind of a rich symbolism around them. They had a mythological significance. You're kind of invoking the powers of, the spirit world. And it's also functional, believe it or not. It looks like it'd be really painful to grab, but your fingers and thumb will just naturally find some of those notches, and it makes for a great grip. Now, speaking of attention to detail, you see more tassels here, right? So that motif continues, and you're going to see it on every part of the weapon pretty much. And I love that you can see the actual, stitching, and you see that thread going around. And you can see there was a colored band there at the base. You can still almost see it. You see how it tapers down? That's just like what I was mentioning on the other end. So it's perfectly symmetrical, the shaft. Again, you see the attention to detail here to bother doing that. You didn't have to. And then it had all these long tassels at the bottom. And luckily, at least one of these metal, kind of decorative ornaments survives. I imagine there was one on every end, but I have no idea. They look kind of frayed, so I think so. And that also would have had the added benefit, if you want to call it that, of making kind of a rattling noise as it walks around and swings. And That's just cool. So I have to be really careful with this when I move it around. It's pretty delicate. So here comes the slungshot end of the slungshot war club. Now we're into more familiar territory, right? So this is the slungshot portion. And the first thing you notice, of course, is that the rope is not bare, right? It's covered. It's covered in this buckskin covering, just like other parts of the weapon. And that helps give it a uniform look, gives the artist more of a canvas to paint at. Trying to give you a view of the frayed rope. There we go. Get it into focus. But that buckskin cover gives you, there, see those color bands? That green one's about the best one, still holding on. And again, this would have been really vibrant. Some slungshot war clubs are just gorgeous, and they'll sell for outrageous amounts. Those had to have been meant just for show. This one here is workmanlike enough that I think it was the real deal, especially with the rope being broken off. Seems that it was swung a lot. But you can see the stitching there and see how complicated it was. It wasn't just one line vertically. They had to do kind of cross sections and go across go in two different directions with the stitching. So here you can see how long this is. So you've got this rope protected by the animal skin, and that's going to protect it from moisture. It's going to keep it from snagging on anything, and it's also quite long, as you can see, right? So here's all this work that went into this, but you end up with this long and protected connection. The length of that alone, that's about as long as your arm, like from your elbow to your fingers, and so very big as far as our weapons go, and then you attach it to that full-size handle that we just examined. So once again, you have a weapon of all-out war. There's no hiding this. It's not a backup weapon. This is your primary weapon, maybe aside from your bow and arrow, I should say, as you head into battle. There you can get a good glimpse of the stitching going in two different directions, just below the animal fur. You can see I left the tag on because I did not want to have to try to get in there to remove that thing, so I left it in place. This guy's pretty delicate. I think it was carried out in the elements for a long, long time, which again is a way that differentiates it from most of our weapons. Now, here's the most striking feature, I think, on the whole thing, of course, which is the animal fur. I'm going to guess black bear. It's held up really well, or maybe the rest of the weapon is not so much. My guess is a incredibly uninformed one, but I will say this is a Cree Nation, C-R-E, Cree Nation implement, and they were a northern tribe or nation, I think including Canada. So they were way up there. It's going to get very cold in the winter, so I'm sure they incorporated animal fur into their clothing and all kinds of items a lot, and this gives an indication of that. So I really like that. It definitely helps it stand out, and it's just a great feature, purely decorative, of course. Now, speaking of slungshots, let's see how similar these are. We're talking about the different cultures using this kind of thing at the same time. Here's this maybe possibly 1700s, probably, well, maybe 1800s slungshot that I've shown before, kind of slungshot jack hybrid. And you can see how similar they are, right? The rope goes straight into this leather sleeve, which is stitched together from two halves coming together. Same thing on both of these. So it's pretty remarkable how similar they are. The splicing of the rope, the way you can see it peek out through the seams, really in a lot of ways. But they might have come from completely independent development paths. I just don't know. Could not find any indication of that. And here's the business end, right? And this looks more familiar than all the other parts that we've seen so far, right? Because this we've seen. Two halves of, animal skin sewn together, forms that pod shape. It's got an oval load. And in that way, it's very similar. The way it differs from a lot of the others we're going to see is Native American slungshots, as far as I can tell, were always hard-loaded, and the hard load was always a large stone. Large, smooth, kind of oval-shaped stone. And here's the pocket sap that you recall from a while back, and again, it's remarkable. Look how similar these are in design, right? The two pods, two halves coming together. You see the stitching exposed, just, very, very similar. But this one is a much more serious implement. This one's not soft-loaded, and it's going to swing in a much, much wider arc because of that long rope and because of the long handle. There's another view of that, and you can see where it's worn right there on the spot where it would strike home. I don't know if that's why. It might just be from storage. But look how wonderfully weathered this thing is. And you'll notice these tassels coming out the front. I've never seen any other Native American or non kind of slungshot sap pod with those coming out, and I think that looks awesome. It just looks like an alien creature. And again, you can see the uniformity of design, where it has a very uniformed look from top to bottom. There were, by the way, other configurations. It wasn't just this long, kind of equivalent of a European flail, Morningstar, or whatever name you want to use. There were other ones. I might have to use pictures to show you, teach a little bit about those in the future, because I was pretty lucky to get this one. and it's obviously the only Native American implement in my current arsenal. But it's really gorgeous. It's, evocative of another culture, a time. It has mythological significance, just all around fascinating. I love everything about it. And that is the Cree Nation Slungshot War Club.